I never thought my son would betray me. He emptied my bank account, ran off with his criminal girlfriend, and left me broken. For days, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Then one morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, my 13-year-old grandson looked up from his cereal and smiled. "Grandma," he said quietly, "don't worry. I took care of it." At first, I thought he was joking, but a few days later, my phone rang. It was my son, and he was screaming. That's when I realized my grandson wasn't bluffing. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I remember the mornings before everything changed. The air smelled of dew and lilacs, and the world still felt safe. I would wake early, pour myself a cup of coffee, and hum an old song my husband used to love as I watered the small garden he planted years before he passed. Those quiet moments made me believe that peace could last forever. My son, Mark, would drop by once or twice a week, always with that half smile that reminded me of his father, charming, impatient, always talking about big plans and bigger dreams. He had a way of lighting up a room, even when his words carried more promises than action. When he introduced me to Tanya, I wanted to believe she was the reason he finally seemed grounded. She was polite, her smile practiced, her voice calm, almost too calm. Something in her eyes never matched her words, though. There was a chill there, a watchfulness, as if she was constantly assessing the value of everything and everyone around her. Still, I told myself that love could change people, that maybe my son had finally found someone who could see the good in him the way I always had. I baked for them. I set extra places at the table, and I laughed at jokes I didn't understand just to see him happy. Looking back now, I realized that what I mistook for stability was only quiet before the storm. In those moments, I was a mother who believed that love could heal anything, who believed that no matter how many times my son stumbled, he would always come home. And he did, until the day he didn't. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that you ignored every warning sign, then you understand how blind love can be. If you're watching this and still think betrayal could never touch your family, think again. Because sometimes it doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the very people you'd give your last dollar to. And if you believe no one could ever deceive you like that, I want you to stay until the end of this story, because by then, you might start questioning the faces around your own dinner table. It started with little things, the kind of details you brush off because they don't quite fit, but don't scream trouble either. Mark began asking for small amounts of money. "Just until Friday, Mom," he'd say with that familiar grin that always melted my resolve. 50 here, 100 there. He said bills were piling up, that Tanya's car needed repairs, that things would be fine next week. And every time, I believed him. He was my son, after all, my only son. Then, I noticed something strange. My bank statements didn't match my checkbook. Tiny withdrawals, $40, $60, $120 tagged as miscellaneous. When I called the bank, they said maybe it was a technical error. Maybe my card had been swiped twice. I wanted to believe them. It was easier than thinking the alternative. Tanya had started dropping odd remarks at dinner. "It must be hard, Linda," she said once, swirling her wine, being tied down by the past. "Don't you ever want to just start over?" I laughed it off, but her words stuck to me like a shadow. Freedom from the past. What did that even mean? Ethan, my sweet, quiet grandson, noticed things too. He never said much, but he saw everything. One evening, I found him sitting on the stairs, listening to his father and Tanya argue in the living room. Their voices were low but sharp words like accounts, timing, and don't mess this up. When they noticed him, the fight ended instantly. Tanya smiled too quickly. Mark looked guilty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was being paranoid, that families argue, that money gets misplaced, that technology makes mistakes. But deep down, something in me stirred. That small, trembling voice inside whispered what I refused to hear. Something's wrong. And I was right. Because the truth doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it starts as a whisper behind closed doors, a number that doesn't add up, a look that lingers too long. Then, one morning, I woke up to an empty account and an even emptier home. The morning it all came crashing down began like any other, quiet, gray, with the faint hum of the coffee maker filling the kitchen. I reached for my phone to check my balance before paying the electricity bill, expecting to see the modest comfort I'd saved over the years. But instead of numbers, I saw zeros. Every account checking, savings, even the emergency fund emptied overnight. My throat tightened. I refreshed the app. Nothing changed. My heart began to pound so hard it echoed in my ears. I called the bank, praying it was fraud, a glitch, anything but what I feared. The woman on the other end sounded apologetic as she read off the transfers, large sums wired to a new account under my son's name. Mark's name. My world tilted. My own child had stripped me bare. When he came by that evening, I confronted him, the printed statements trembling in my hands. "Why, Mark? Tell me this isn't true." He didn't deny it. Instead, he glared at me like I was the problem. "You never trusted me, Mom. You think I can't handle my own life? I just took what's mine." His voice rose with every word, sharp and cutting. Tanya stood a few steps behind him, arms crossed, eyes flat and unreadable. When I looked at her, she smiled a small, knowing smirk that made my stomach twist. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence said it all. I begged them to stop, to think, to remember who we were as a family. But they'd already made up their minds. Mark grabbed their suitcases, already packed, and walked out. No apology. No hesitation. Just the slam of the front door echoing through the house like a final sentence. I sank into the kitchen chair, surrounded by unpaid bills and fading family photos. The walls felt colder, emptier. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, each drop sounding like the ticking of a clock I could no longer rewind. In one cruel day, my son stole not just my money, but my heart. The days that followed felt like moving through fog. Every morning I woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare, that Mark would walk through the door with that same boyish grin, saying it was all a mistake. But the silence in the house told the truth louder than words ever could. My phone barely rang, except for the occasional well-meaning friend from church asking if I was managing okay. Their voices carried pity, the kind that wrapped around my heart like thorns. I stopped going to Sunday service altogether. I couldn't stand the looks, those tiny, sympathetic nods that said, "Poor Linda." Even her own son robbed her. The neighbors whispered too. I could see them pause by their mailboxes when I stepped outside, their smiles tight, their conversations cut short. I pretended not to notice, but the shame burned through me. I, who had raised my son to be honest, to be kind, had been made a fool by him in front of the entire town. I kept the curtains drawn most days, moving quietly from room to room, living like a ghost inside my own home. Ethan was the only light left. He came by every evening after school, carrying a small backpack and that same quiet determination he'd always had. He'd set the table, cook simple meals, macaroni, scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, and insist I eat. "Grandma, don't worry," he'd whisper, resting his hand on mine. "I'll make it right." I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. "You're just a child, sweetheart," I'd say softly. "There's nothing you can do about this." But his eyes, those deep, steady eyes, held something older than his years, something I didn't understand at the time. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, serious and calm, then went back to eating his dinner in silence. That night, as I watched him wash the dishes, I remember thinking how much he reminded me of his grandfather, quiet strength, hidden behind gentleness. I didn't know it then, but my grandson wasn't just a child. And what he did next would make his father beg for mercy. I began to notice Ethan staying up later than usual. His bedroom light would glow faintly through the crack under the door long after midnight, the faint clicking of his keyboard echoing down the hall. I assumed he was doing schoolwork or playing those harmless computer games kids his age loved. He had always been quiet and studious, so I didn't think much of it at first. But something about his focus felt different, intent, purposeful. He wasn't wasting time. He was working. One afternoon, I found a small notebook on the kitchen counter with strange scribbles, numbers, arrows, and unfamiliar symbols. "Just homework," he said quickly when I asked. But I caught the hesitation in his voice. A few days later, I overheard him muttering words that sounded technical. IP address, encrypted chain, crypto wallets. I didn't understand any of it, but the terms pricked at my memory. Mark had once bragged over dinner about making real money through something called private wallets, how no one could trace it. Back then, I thought it was just talk. But maybe it hadn't been. Ethan started connecting dots no adult had even noticed. Using his school coding lessons and a borrowed laptop, he began tracing digital footprints, transaction IDs, message logs, email headers. What he discovered left him silent for days. He found links between Mark's accounts and several fake online stores, each one funneling money to offshore platforms. He even traced messages between Mark and Tanya, sent through hidden channels filled with coded language about drops, timelines, and disappearing clean. Sometimes I'd peek into his room, thinking I'd find him watching cartoons or scrolling through social media. Instead, he sat there, brow furrowed, lines of data reflected in his glasses, piecing together a digital puzzle far bigger than any child should face. He barely spoke about what he was doing, but I could see the quiet determination in his face, the same calm focus his grandfather had when fixing broken watches. I thought he was playing games. I didn't realize he was playing detective. Then, one night, I walked into his room and saw my son's face on his screen. When I stepped into Ethan's room that night, I froze at the sight of my son's photo glowing on the screen. Ethan didn't flinch. His face was calm, too calm for a 13-year-old. "Grandma," he said softly, "I need you to trust me." The way he said it steady, certain, made me realize whatever he was doing wasn't just child's play. He turned the laptop toward me, and what I saw sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just Mark. Tanya's face appeared too, under different names, different IDs, each one connected to online profiles that looked professional but were completely fake. Real faces, false identities, and long trails of money transfers leading nowhere. Ethan began to explain, showing me files, screenshots, and account links. Tanya wasn't who she said she was. Her real name wasn't Tanya at all. She'd been involved in multiple fraud cases across 3 states, each one tied to financial scams targeting elderly victims. There were warrants under aliases she'd abandoned years ago. And Mark, my son, my own flesh and blood, had helped her move the money. He wasn't just her partner in love, he was her partner in crime. My stomach turned as Ethan opened a folder filled with emails between them. They were planning to leave the country, new passports, tickets booked under fake names, and a line in one of the messages that shattered me completely. "Once we're settled, she won't be our problem anymore." That was me. Ethan copied everything onto a small flash drive, his hands steady as if he'd done this 100 times before. "We need help," he said. "But not from the police yet. Someone we can trust." That's when he mentioned Frank, a retired police officer who had been my husband's closest friend decades ago. Frank had helped us once when Mark was a teenager and had gotten into trouble with the wrong crowd. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but somehow Ethan had found his contact. He reached out to Frank through a private email, explaining enough to get his attention without exposing too much. To my surprise, Frank responded almost immediately. He agreed to meet the next day, but warned Ethan sternly through the phone, "You're walking into dangerous waters, son. If what you're saying is true, these people won't think twice about protecting themselves." Ethan simply nodded, his voice calm. "I'm not afraid, sir. I just want to help my grandma." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the faint hum of Ethan's laptop from down the hall, realizing something profound. The boy I thought needed protecting was protecting me. The next morning, Ethan was up before sunrise. I found him sitting at the kitchen table, the same spot where I used to read him bedtime stories when he was little. But now, the look in his eyes wasn't that of a child, it was quiet determination. I thought he was just trying to distract himself, maybe doing homework, but he was already several steps ahead of me. While I poured him orange juice, he was finalizing what would become the turning point of everything. He had worked all night with Frank, sending detailed evidence screenshots, transaction records, and identity files to federal authorities through an encrypted email. Frank insisted they stay anonymous, at least for now. "Let them take the bait first," he said. "Once the system locks in, there's no escape." Ethan nodded, absorbing every instruction like someone twice his age. I didn't know any of this. To me, Ethan was just quiet, maybe still processing the pain of losing his father to greed. I couldn't have imagined that while I sat there grieving, he was working on dismantling the very web my son and that woman had built. Ethan never slipped. He acted normal, maybe even too normal, washing dishes, helping with groceries, asking about old family photos as if nothing was happening. But late at night, his light would stay on, the faint glow from under his door, the only sign that something deeper was at play. Frank called him every evening from a private number, updating him on what the investigators had found. The authorities had begun monitoring online transactions connected to Mark's accounts. They tracked his movements through his phone's activity and Tanya's frequent attempts to access new accounts under stolen names. Piece by piece, their escape plan started to crumble. Every move they made tightened the net around them. Ethan never told me, not even when I asked why he looked tired or why he seemed distracted during dinner. He would just smile faintly and say, "Everything's going to be okay soon, Grandma." I thought he was just trying to comfort me. I didn't know he was already writing the next chapter of our lives, one that would end with justice. I remember that night clearly, the night the calm broke. I was sitting on the couch, staring at an old family photo, trying to remember happier times. The phone rang. It was past midnight. I hesitated before answering, thinking it might be one of those wrong numbers that come at strange hours. But the moment I picked it up, I heard it, my son's voice, trembling, panicked, desperate. "Mom!" he shouted, his words cracking. "You have to help me, please, she's gone crazy." And just like that, everything came crashing down with a single phone call. The moment I heard his voice on the other end of the line, my heart stopped. It was a sound I hadn't heard in months, yet I recognized it instantly, the same trembling tone he used as a boy when he was caught lying. Only now there was terror behind it. "Mom!" Mark shouted, his words stumbling over each other. "They're coming for me. You have to help me, please. You don't understand, they know everything." In the background, I could hear chaos sirens wailing, footsteps pounding, doors slamming. My hands shook as I gripped the phone tighter, unsure if I was listening to reality or a nightmare. I wanted to speak, but no words came out at first. All I could hear was my own breath, uneven and shallow. He kept pleading, his voice cracking through static. "Mom, please, I made a mistake, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far. Tanya said it was safe. I didn't..." Then his voice broke completely. "I'm scared, Mom. They're outside. Please, just help me." The desperation in his tone pierced through every defense I had built over the months. For a fleeting second, I saw him not as the man who had ruined me, but as the boy I once rocked to sleep after nightmares. The same boy who used to promise, "I'll never leave you, Mom." Tears blurred my vision, and I swallowed hard before whispering, "Help you?" My voice trembled at first, then steadied. "You emptied my life, Mark. You took everything your father and I worked for. You didn't just steal my money, you stole my peace, my trust, my faith in you." He tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "And now you want me to save you?" "No, son. This time, you're on your own." There was a pause, long, cold, final. I could hear him inhale sharply, as if realizing the weight of what I'd just said. Then, distant shouting, the sound of a door bursting open, and the faint click of handcuffs, the line went dead. I sat there in silence, my hand still gripping the receiver long after the call ended. The house felt heavier than ever, yet somehow, I felt lighter. The tears that streamed down my cheeks weren't of heartbreak anymore, they were of release. For the first time, my son's choices no longer broke me, they freed me. The silence that followed wasn't painful, it was peaceful. It was the sound of an old wound finally closing. After the call ended, the silence in the house was so deep it almost echoed. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, my thoughts tangled between relief and heartbreak. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound reminding me that time was still moving forward, even when I felt frozen in place. Ethan came out of his room quietly, his footsteps soft against the floor. He must have heard everything he always noticed more than he let on. Without saying a word, he sat beside me on the couch. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, in that small, steady voice of his, he said, "Grandma, I sent everything to the police." At first, I didn't fully process what he said. My head turned slowly toward him, my mouth parting, but no sound came out. "What do you mean?" I finally whispered. His eyes didn't waver. "All the files, the bank records, the emails. Frank helped me. They knew where to find Dad and Tanya because of us." I just stared at him, my breath catching in my chest. A part of me felt proud, overwhelmingly proud, but another part broke all over again. My son was in handcuffs, my grandson was the reason, and I was the one caught between them. I placed a hand over my chest, feeling my heartbeat thud beneath my palm. "He's still my son," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I know what he did was wrong, but he's still my boy. I carried him, I raised him, I prayed for him every night. I never wanted this." Ethan's expression didn't harden, it softened. He reached over, took my hand gently, and said, "I know, Grandma, but you're my everything. I couldn't just sit back and let him hurt you again. I did what I had to do." Something in those words pierced through all the pain that had been weighing me down. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't just see a boy. I saw a protector, a young man who had faced what even grown adults would run from. My throat tightened as tears filled my eyes. I reached for him, pulling him close, my arms wrapping around his shoulders. He didn't resist. He just leaned into me, resting his head against my chest. The world outside was still and quiet, but inside that small living room, something sacred happened. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was healing, slow, raw, and real. I ran my fingers through his hair and whispered, "You did the right thing, Ethan." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The soft rise and fall of his breathing against me said everything. For a long time, we just stayed that way, two souls bound by love, pain, and the truth that had finally set us free. The morning light crept through Linda's curtains, soft but heavy, like the kind that follows a storm. On the television screen, the news anchor's voice trembled with urgency as the headline flashed, "Local couple arrested in major family fraud case." The names that followed were the same ones that had once filled her home with laughter: Mark Davis and Tanya Reynolds. Police footage rolled. Sirens, flashing lights, reporters calling out questions into the chaos. Mark's face appeared for just a moment, pale, hollow, and broken. The same son who once used to run to her with scraped knees was now being led away in handcuffs. Linda stood still in the middle of her living room, her hand shaking around a half-empty cup of coffee. It didn't feel like victory. Not even close. Justice had arrived. Yes, but it came wearing the face of her own child. That evening, she found herself walking into the gray walls of a prison visitation room. The smell of metal and bleach filled the air. Across a thick pane of glass, she saw him smaller than she remembered, shoulders hunched, eyes filled with regret. There were no words between them, just the silence of everything that had already been said. For a long moment, they simply stared, mother and son, divided by more than glass. And in that silence, she realized something painful but pure. Love can remain even when trust is gone. When she finally left that place, the air outside felt different, lighter, almost free. Ethan stood waiting by the car, his young face calm but knowing. He didn't need to say a word. She could see it in his eyes, the same strength, the same love, the same promise that life, somehow, would go on. Back home, Linda placed an old photograph on her mantel, one of Mark as a smiling boy, beside a new picture of Ethan, grinning in his school uniform. For the first time in a long time, she didn't cry. She just stood there, breathing quietly, surrounded by both pain and peace. Because sometimes, justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like truth finally stepping out of the shadows. It looks like a mother learning to let go. And sometimes, it takes losing everything to finally see what truly matters. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of grief slowly softened into something gentler, something almost like peace. The house that once echoed with silence began to fill again with the quiet rhythm of living. The garden outside bloomed brighter that spring. Linda's hands, once trembling from sorrow, now found strength in the soil, planting seeds, trimming roses, feeling life return under her fingertips. The air smelled of renewal. The sun lingered longer over her little patch of earth, as if the world itself was giving her another chance. Inside, Ethan hummed while setting the dinner table, 2 plates, 1 candle flickering in the middle. He moved with the calm confidence of someone far older than his years, yet still just a boy who had chosen love over fear. Sometimes she'd catch him glancing at her, checking, quietly making sure she was okay. Evenings became their sacred time. They'd cook together, laugh over burnt toast, and share stories about Grandpa, about the good days, before everything went wrong. There was no longer talk of betrayal or loss, just soft laughter and forgiveness carried gently on the air. The orange glow of sunset painting the horizon. Birds returning home. The world finally at peace. And over that stillness, the voice of the heart speaks one last time. I lost my savings, I lost my trust, and I lost the son I once knew. But in the ashes of that loss, I found something stronger: hope. Ethan reminded me that love doesn't always come from where we expect. But when it does, it protects us, even when it hurts. The screen fades slowly to black, leaving behind the warmth of a home rebuilt on quiet resilience. Betrayal can destroy a family, but sometimes love and justice come from the most unexpected place.